Well, good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good.
Good
Thanks, Shar.
morning.
You're in
Hi,
your
Shar.
beautiful accommodations out there, I see.
Yeah, I'm down here in Puerto Vallarta right now.
Oh, wow.
So I did some jungle swimming yesterday and went on hiking up through multiple waterfalls. I even jumped off a diving thing over 20 feet into a waterfall uh, lagoon.
Nice.
So I happen to have the inside guys, the guys that actually grew up here before they became tourist attractions. So we were able to hike back into the deep wilderness where young boys and girls would swim when they were young. So
That's
That's
great.
awesome. Very cool.
the
So we
only
just
thing the only thing is a challenge is getting bug bites.
oh yeah.
There's plenty of
Well,
that, that's for sure.
yeah. Well, we just had Lewis join. Hi, Lewis. Welcome to the People Strategy Forum. So thank you for being here. We're just chatting for a few minutes while we're waiting for others to join, and we'll start at the top of the hour.
Absolutely. It's kind of cold in Colorado right now, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
it
is.
is.
It is. I went for a walk this morning with my dog, and as I was leaving, my wife's like, "Wow, you have like 3 layers on." I was like, "Yep." And we both started walking, and we walked maybe a quarter mile. My wife's like, "Yeah, 3 layers was a good idea." She was a little
Woo,
underdressed.
you're pretty intense to be able to do that. Gosh.
It's
You're not a runner in the snow, are you? A snow runner or a snow
sometimes.
biker?
Yeah, sometimes. Not so much a biker, but a runner sometimes. Um, I have the good fortune of living across from Bear Creek Lake Park, which is a really large open space on the west side of Denver, and lots of trails. I can basically be on dirt within a quarter mile from my house, which is nice. So basically, walk to the end of the road and take a right, and I'm on dirt. So I
Nice.
Are you a skier, Dave?
I am. I was actually a youth ski instructor at Copper Mountain for a couple years. Um,
I was just sitting on the Epic Pass reservation system trying to get
it's going to be
something.
interesting. It's going to be
So
interesting.
it's so frustrating,
And Copper's doing, you can reserve parking spaces. So you don't
right?
reserve the tickets, but you reserve the parking space because Copper's kind of on an island,
Yep.
to itself to some degree.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they're doing it by parking space rather than lift tickets. So,
Yeah, so for those that are not in Colorado, the Colorado is requiring you to reserve your reserve a spot in your before you go skiing, so they don't have too many people on the hill, and so the key is though is if you go as a family, that family pod can all get on the hill because they're all part of a one social group. But if you go as an individual, then there's it's lesser chance of those people being accepted. So it's kind of a change of how
Hmm.
people they control the virus and so forth on the mountains.
Yeah. It sounds like a drive-through back in the day where a lot of us would pile into the trunk, all trying to get into the drive-through
yep.
so that we wouldn't have to pay the admission fee. But I also heard that DIA is doing the same thing. They have the new technology that's come up just today for how you park at DIA, some kind of app process as well,
Oh,
and that's
really?
also brand new.
Huh.
Hmm. That was on the news. I am getting U.S. news here, but
Just opening a COVID testing station at DIA, and I just saw this flip across my screen, which begged the question for me of is that going to be a mandatory thing to get on an airplane now? That you have to actually do a spit test or an instant COVID test.
Huh.
Yeah, well, they were talking about that earlier, as far as some locations would require you get tested ahead of time, but the problem is that it takes a couple days to get those results, right? So
yeah, it's not really rapid testing anymore.
yeah. And if they get backed up, then you have to get it like exactly a certain amount of time before your flight. And if they're busy and overwhelmed, then well, you could potentially miss your flight because you don't have the test results back yet. And so there's a lot of complexities there.
Hmm.
But
It looks like we've got a few people starting to bounce in, so that's awesome. And
Yeah.
Lisa, you and I have crossed paths on a
Welcome.
number of occasions.
So-
Different events and conferences and different things, whether it's Boulder Startup Week or Denver Startup Week or other HR things around the Denver area. So we've definitely bumped into each other. I can't remember where the first one was. It might have been at a Disrupt HR
That's
thing
yeah,
a few years
right,
ago.
'cause I did come to them quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
was just trying to remember if it was my past life from my NLP days because, that somehow just popped up in my mind. So
Yeah. I don't know.
Are you still involved in Disrupt HR, Dave?
I am to some degree. I've spoken there twice, and I worked with that community for quite a while. I also work with Enrique Rubio on hacking HR and that kind of stuff. And then there's also another Denver group, HR Underground, that I kind of play around with.
they're underground, right?
And then Culture Labs
And,
was
that's
one.
another one.
Yeah, Culture Labs was another one that I was a part of the board on.
I know for sure that's where we met, was Culture Labs. That was
Culture
Josh.
Labs?
Yeah.
Yeah, with Josh.
Is he still running that at all?
Josh, Christopher, and I ran it for about a year and a half, and it. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think Culture Labs out of California, kind of the larger organization, was changing their structure to where they wanted to start charging for events and a couple other things, and even charging membership fees, and we're like, I don't know if we want to get into all of that. So we kind of dissolved our partnerships. That's not to say it doesn't still happen, but we're not affiliated with them directly anymore, at least not in a leadership capacity.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, we're about to start.
Yeah.
So, hello. Hey.
Howdy.
Thank you, everyone, for joining our People Strategy Forum. We're excited to have you. This has been ongoing every week on 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Some of us are all over the world, though, right now. And we're a mastermind of leaders dedicated to creating workplaces where we thrive, employers reward, and customers love. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we have many loyal listeners that have been following along with us. So welcome. We appreciate your time. So my name is Shar Miller. I am a people strategist. I'm a partner with Comp Team and also a former HR executive in major healthcare systems, as well as I own my own company called Rocky Mountain Health Advocates and use all these different people strategies with Rocky Mountain Health Advocates. And I also enjoy doing some career coaching for those that want to get out of the corporate kind of world. Also happy to have Sam Reeve. He is a people rewards strategist, compensation. He's the founder of Comp Team, and really he is the driving force to doing these people strategy forums with his team. So thank you, Sam, for partnering with us. Lisa Jackson is a culture strategist, and she's been doing an awesome job with corporate culture pros, and she's got some amazing information. You'll love to follow her on LinkedIn and some of her platforms. And then also Sumit Singla. He's a people strategist as well. He does HR consulting and talent management consulting, and he has just an extensive background. So love for you to follow them. Follow us on LinkedIn. Look for us because we are always posting some great material. So thank you for joining us on our People Strategy Rewards. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, Dave Needham. And he is, as you can see, with everything that he follows along, he is here to talk with us and provide every area. I like that, HR smoke jumper. That's a good one. Maverick, diversity inclusion champion. So thank you, Dave, for joining us today. And when you do your presentation, you can give us more of your background and your expertise. And just want to talk about briefly the logistics of what we're doing today. You'll notice down in the chat, we are very involved, very engaged. We love to know that you're here, one, and that you'll have questions, comments, commentary. Please let us know. We'll interact with you and follow along with you. Also the Q&A. And then also Sam will pull up a poll because we have multiple free gifts. We have a free TMA assessment that we offer our participants. Also free portal access. And then also you can ask to spend some time with us individually. It's about 15 minutes or so for each of us. So you can also email Sam, and we'll show you the email at the end at sam@compteam.net if you would like to speak to any one of us as a complimentary gift to you.
And
So
what I'll do, Shar, is I'm going to bring up that poll a little bit later in the event here at the midpoint.
Okay, awesome. So you'll get to see that. It'll pop up on your screen. Just click one of those items if you'd like to participate, and then you can just narrow it out and continue watching us. So today we have some exciting information about to manage and evolve, thrive during recovery. So a lot of employers are going through time of trying to understand what to do during this time to reward and take care of their employees. And also Dave is going to spend some time talking about performance management and how it's broken. I completely agree with that in my practices in HR. And then all of us will have conversation at the end. Lisa, Sumit, myself, Sam, and Dave will have conversation with you at the end. And please interject, don't be shy. Let us know you're here. We'd love to have your commentary and involve you into the discussion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get going. Sam, did you want to talk about know your workforce and how to reward them?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the big thing that we want to talk about is how we connect employee performance or pay and performance together. So it's quite a complicated thing. I mean, we've done it in the past, looking at strictly intrinsic rewards, and a lot of businesses have completely failed in that regard. So of course, it's a lot of success here really depends on how we communicate and involve our workforce. And so I'm going to go through some of the major themes here. We're going to start with showing some of the trends in performance management are happening, and Dave is going to go a lot more in detail on that. We're also going to talk about a couple of ways to get to know your talent better, and that's and for us to make sure that we're having rewards that resonate with our people. We need to make sure that we understand what they want and their preferences and so forth. So that's going to be a big part of the conversation today. So that's part of diagnosing here what the entire workforce is looking for, and then understanding what each individual is looking for in their talent profile. And then we'll go into some of those extrinsic methodologies that I mentioned earlier and how we can adapt them to be more aligned with understanding what our employees want. And so I'm going to take you through that. First, let's just talk about the common complaints and annual reviews. Now, a few months ago, I did a presentation about performance management here on the forum, and why annual reviews are falling out of favor. Currently, there's still roughly about 70 to 75% of companies that are relying on the annual review process, and that's working for some of them. But there's a growing trend more and more towards something that is more frequent, such as real-time feedback, quarterly reviews, or mid-year reviews, or something of the like. But the big thing here, the reason why the annual review process has gotten a lot of heat over the past several years is the managers start relying too much on that end of the year review process and not focusing enough on communication and performance throughout the year. And so that is the big drive of why things are changing now. The next thing here I want to introduce to the Workforce Experience Scorecard. Now, this is a tool that we can use to understand what the workforce at your particular company is looking for in the rewards. Like I started off with, we need to understand what drives people and what they prefer to have as part of the rewards and recognition package to ensure that we're giving something that's meaningful to them. There's no use for us to have certain programs in place that don't resonate with our employees, right? So the first thing is understanding our demographics in the company and looking for what they want. And so having a tool like the Workforce Experience Scorecard will help us get there. Now, I want to make sure that this is not confused with a cultural assessment or a pulse, or I'm missing the word right now, but the annual employee opinion survey. This is not that, but that is quite similar. like an employee opinion survey, that is very important to understand what the current sentiment of employees. But this particular, the workforce experience scorecard is designed to understand what rewards can actually be successful at your company. And we'll go through that in a minute. And so it starts out with the foundation of success and overall your reward programs. And then we look at different elements here. So first is those elements of motivation and how those factors that empower employees to succeed at your company. So the first thing they need to know about is where is the company going? What's the leadership style? I mean, these are things that are going to attract certain types of employees in their preferences of the organization. Also, direction, how well goals are disseminated in the company, and how well people work together. So those are the factors of motivation. And there's a lot more details here, but I'm just going to go through this at a very high level today. The next is those factors of engagement, and this is how we work together for success. Now, for us to do our best work, of course, we need to be given the empowerment to do so. Or we need to make sure that our managers trust our competence in a particular capacity, and we're given the ability and the accountability to perform our job without heavy-handed oversight. And so that's what empowerment is. And then we have impact. The things that we need to feel like the things that we do on a daily basis will have an impact on the company and in society and our customers and our coworkers around us. It gives us it gives our work meaning. And those things are quite important. The next is very important piece, personal value. This is ensuring that the people you're hiring out of the talent pool outside your company have values that are aligned with the company values. And so this will help. If this is the foundation of engagement, if that's not there, then you're hiring people that just need to get a job or are looking to get paid. They're not going to have that alignment with your company, and they're not going to have that intrinsic motivation to go forward in that role and perform really well. And then finally, fulfillment in this engagement category. This is where a person that joins your company will have the opportunity to grow and be fulfilled in their career, have those career advancement opportunities, whether it's up the career ladder or greater in scope across, building their scope of their role across the organization. And then the next piece here is reward. And these are the part of the pieces that we're going to talk about today. And this is how the company, their coworkers, and your customers all share in success. Now, I call this the three-legged stool concept, because we need to think about all of these as equally important pieces. We need to have the company that has the infrastructure where people can come to work and provide their talents. And of course, it's very important for those employees to deliver that expertise to the customer, to where the customer wants to be loyal to that particular product and continue investing. And so it's important for us to think about them in that context. The next is those pieces of reward. Now we have the culture elements, development, recognition, and finally comp and benefits. Now, culture, as Lisa will say, is all of this. But what I'm talking about particularly here when we're talking about culture is a purposeful culture, a culture that is a reward in itself. For instance, it's the identity we get when we work at certain companies, whether it may be Apple. Apple's known to be, when we think of Apple, we think of innovation, we think of creativity, and being part of Apple as an employee or part of their workforce, that kind of rubs off on us, right? We're known ourselves as being creative and innovative. We see an Apple employee, they might say, oh, they must be really good. They must be creative. They must be innovative. That's where the culture kind of rubs off and becomes part of the reward of having that identity with that particular company. The next is those development opportunities and being able to grow and advance in your career. And we'll talk about that a little bit in these next few slides. And then recognized and having adequate pay and benefits, pay that not only is competitive, but can also drive behaviors in certain elements if we want to focus behavior. So it's not, so what I usually say is that if we really want to motivate and inspire people, that is more in the recognition realm. But if we want to focus behaviors and so forth, we can do a lot of that through certain types of pay elements. Now that's the what we're looking at in the workforce experience scorecard, and we can look at certain companies and rate them. So green is good, red is a problem, and so we can look at a company and see where there might have certain issues, and based on this, only certain plans, compensation plans, recognition plans, will be successful at that company. As an example, if a company is very poor at direction or disseminating goals and setting goals effectively and that are realistic, it's going to be a real hard time for them to be able to have a bonus program in place that are based on those goals, right? Because they're not good at that, and they need to have leadership that is going to help support those goals and so forth. Big issues there. So the purpose of that is first in rewarding your employees is you have to understand what your workforce wants overall and your capacity to deliver certain rewards in your company. The next here is understanding what each individual needs personally. When they work at your company, we need to understand what their personality is. We need to get to know them, understand how they're going to fit in with the team, their preferences of work, and so forth. How much oversight they require versus maybe they want to have more of a hands-off type of environment. So as you know, we are big proponents of the TMA method here at CompTeam, and we use that as a tool for our clients to go and get to know their employees better. Those assessments will tell them about their work style and will help create a platform of conversation to where they can dive in deeper. So the first piece here is the personality description and their preferences of how they like to work and what is their best way of working in a company. The next is we look at other factors. Let me advance my screen here, such as we start building all this information together in a talent profile, such as, what do they have accomplished in their past? What are their areas or what competencies that they have that they need to develop, and so forth. We build and we track what a person's preferences are. Then we can go back and say, okay, this is the way that person likes to be developed. This is what they're trying to achieve in their career. This is the type of work they love to do and they're inspired by. So keeping a good file of this information is quite important. Now, the TMA method allows us to do this we can gather through the personality type profiles. We can look at the different competencies that a person is growing and developing in their organization, in their job. And then we can also determine their learning style, who they like to work with, and the style of learning that most resonates with them, if we want to reward them with a development opportunity, or place them with a mentor that is going to bring their best work and behaviors out that are going to benefit themselves professionally and the companies. So that can be quite powerful. So those are the pieces that we need to know for an individual. So just to recap on that, we need to start out at the top and knowing what our company or our demographic wants as a whole. And then we need to make sure managers are taking the time to understand their people and know them individually one by one. Now, the next piece I'm going to talk about here is, whoops, I went too far, is how we attach rewards to this. Now, the first piece that I talked about at all of this is that it's most important to understand a person's intrinsic drive. So this is the drive that they have, their internal passions that really influence their best work. This is about hiring the right person and bringing them to the organization. And then we're going to talk in these next three factors, base pay, short-term and long-term incentives, about those extrinsic factors of how we can further focus and focused behaviors for the right outcomes. So let's start with the first piece here, performance development without any kind of performance pay, without those extrinsic factors. This is where we have that regular feedback, and Dave's going to talk about the importance of this in his discussion. But we're having that regular feedback one-on-one with our employees, giving them assessing what's going on and realigning and rewarding them through recognition at that point. Now that we can do a lot of non-cash rewards, such as, giving people development opportunities, even giving little gifts and so forth that are meaningful to them. If a person's a music lover, for instance, you give them little gifts that are in that particular passion that they have of them. And so these are ways to recognize people for their contribution and really have something that's meaningful to them when you're delivering a reward. Now the next pieces here are base pay, and I'm just going to tell you a few areas in the extrinsic elements of how to drive plans here. The first is in the base pay area. Now, right now, traditionally we've heard a lot about merit pay in the past. Now, merit pay is basically an increase in base pay that employees give on an annual basis based on their typically their discretionary determination of how they are performing in that particular year. Now, I think that there's a misalignment here, and we need to look at this a little bit more refined, in a refined way, particularly about how a particular employee is building their competence in their role. So we need to identify what are those key knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required for that particular role, and measure that. And we do this through the TMA process by measuring competencies here. As we can see, for this job here is an HR business partner, and we're measuring their ability to coach and how persuasive they are, and their verbal expression and learning and so forth. Now, through the TMA 360-degree process, we can actually get a score for each one of these particular features. And we can use those scores to move a person through the pay range. So for instance, as a person starts, they may their competency is pretty junior in these particular factors. And so we would place them at the beginning of the range. And as they develop those competencies, we would start moving them through the range from a midpoint, which means that they're fully competent in the role, and to the expert and advanced areas where they're exceeding their requirements of the role and are really growing. And then as we are getting to this latter part, that we start thinking about the promotional opportunities or expanding that role to be even bigger for that individual. So the big secret of this is measuring this effectively. And you can do this through a 360-degree feedback mechanism. And so you're not reliant totally on the manager of giving feedback. You can talk to colleagues, the customers, and so forth, and get feedback from them as far as that person's competence in each of these areas. Another issue here is do you have any questions there, Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about this one, Sam, to clarify on when this is happening, because oftentimes in an organization from a culture standpoint, they may not be ready for a 360-degree feedback process, and by the time you have to make some of these decisions. So how do you kind of look at that in terms of timing? So
as an evolutionary piece here, so when you're first rolling this out in a company, you're right, they may not be ready for that 360-degree feedback. They may not have people that are communicating effectively with one another. They may not have all those different stakeholders identified and so forth. And so it could take a year or two for them to get to that level. So the very first part of introducing this methodology to a company is to first train them on the concept of entry and fit and where an expert is. I mean, this is a pretty simple concept where we want to make sure that those that are more junior at the beginning of the range and that are more senior at the latter part of the range. And then we're going to want to do a study and to ensure that we are looking at talent fairly, and maybe doing the first step or the second step to this could be having a committee where we're looking at talent and we're discussing talent levels. And we're doing a calibration type of a session. So is Joe and Sally, are they performing on the same competence level for this particular role? And you have multiple team members maybe voicing their opinions on this, so you can calibrate that thought. Now, what that does is the next step is that we can start bringing some leveling elements of what a person that's developing their competencies looks like, and that is commonly shared among that team. And then so we can get, as we grow in this process, we can get more refined and eventually even attach a score to it. And so that's how we can evolve to this type of thing. It usually takes about 2 years to do that, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. And because I think that sometimes when, it's all also tied a little bit back to the performance evaluation process, right? That you're describing here. And I know that sometimes that is it's always an evolutionary process. And what I like about what you're describing with this one, Sam, is just how the potential for it to be very transparent and fair.
Mm-hmm.
The way that you're going about it is more important than any one person's scores, that it looks and feels transparent and fair. So very cool.
Yeah, it's a matter of, it's important for us to include more than just one person in a review, right? That's been the big fallout of the annual review process, is that sometimes nowadays your manager doesn't really know what you're doing. You're working with so many different teams, maybe across the globe.
Yep.
That there's other stakeholders that have a better understanding of your performance than even your manager may have. So it's important to have that diversity in there. And also, if 360s scare you, 360 degrees have evolved and become much more specialized in the past few years. So this particular, when we say 360 degree here, it's very simple process. We're only grading the competencies. We're only rating these particular competencies. We're not doing a full-blown 360 degree process, as some of those may are aware of in the marketplace.
Where you're evaluating competencies. Yeah.
Right. So to go on, I want to just quickly show you this other piece of looking at a performance management process on that the Paychex is advised a lot of their customers, which is the Paychex 4x4 model. And here, this is where we're trying to look at things, or the performance in the past as well as performance in the future. So, and we're trying to keep the feedback on a very positive note. And we're doing this throughout the year. So this is a way that Paychex is advising some of their clients to go away from the annual feedback methodology to give more regular cadence of feedback. And this is on a quarterly basis. So the first thing is that they set their goals and objectives each quarter. And two of these questions that we can see here, 1 and 2, are focused on the past. How did I do against my goals? And then how did I demonstrate, or how are my behaviors aligned with the company values, for instance? And then the future part of this is, okay, what are my goals for next quarter? And what kind of development or opportunities in coaching or whatever do I need to make sure that I'm on track for that? And so that sets the pace for that transition to the next quarter. Now, the feedback that those employees get at each quarterly review is simply, are you on track, or are you not there yet? And so this is a way to keep that employee engaged without giving them saying, well, you're not meeting expectations, for instance. And so it's a much more positive way of looking at this. And then finally, they round this out at the end of the year by giving a more formal review in their process. But the important part here is you can use each one of these touch points for periods of recognition, and spot awards, and even a bonus program, if that makes sense for your organization. The other thing here is, as before we go to Dave's presentation, is we talked last week about the 9-box process, and this could be, this is very common in a lot of organizations, but we're starting to look at better ways of looking at or utilizing. Looking at succession and so forth. But those companies that have a 9-box can leverage this particular strategy to differentiate their long-term incentive rewards. And for those that are more showing leadership potential or long-term potential, then we might want to accelerate or have larger long-term incentive rewards compared to those that are lower on that particular scale. But it's definitely a way to differentiate. The important part here is differentiation of rewards. All right, I know I kind of went through this pretty quickly. I wanted to tee up some of these concepts so we can have more robust discussion with Dave. So let's move into that piece here. But as the first thing I mentioned that we're going to bring up a poll. And I've kind of went through some of those TMA methods. And so I want to jump into this poll. And so anybody that wants to try out the TMA method, please feel free to sign up for that. We have the TMA assessment. And so what it looks like to get that assessment to where you can have a better conversation with your employees, or perhaps you want to use this for your own personal development. What we'll do is we can send you that assessment, and then we'll have a free coaching session on what that looks like and how to use that tool to develop personally, and how you could potentially use that tool for your direct reports.
Well, I also just want to say thank you, Sam. You actually went through this process with my company, Rocky Mountain Health Advocates. We went through this process of not only adopting to the TMA model and identifying the performance aspects through companies, but you were awesome to come in and do this similar process. And I love the question that Lisa brought up, because we are also a new startup. We're only about a year old or a year and a half old. We really didn't have the ability to do the full 360 process. But we did incorporate a lot of our up and coming leaders that are on the verge of being promoted to manager. So I just want to thank you for giving us that opportunity and actually trying out all of these principles that you presented today. So I highly encourage any of you participants on the line, take advantage of Sam, meeting with him, take advantage of that TMA portal. And I'd be happy to talk to you as well as an actual company owner that has actually applied everything that he was discussing today. And our journey of being the most innovative, progressive, total rewards organization as we pay more fairly than many other companies do out there. So thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Shar. I'm really excited about how it's trending at Rocky Mountain Health Advocates. I mean, they're just loving that and the coaching that's coming from that TMA method. So yeah, great.
Yeah, it's been interesting having the executive leaders learn about this, but you've been awesome in communicating about this. So.
Thanks.
Great.
Well, hey, Dave. Great.
So now we could pull up Dave.
Howdy.
So Dave, you want to share your screen?
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull it over here.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right. Can you guys see everything?
Yes. Looks good.
Yeah.
Try and go into presentation mode and see if that screws things up. Sometimes it does. Looks like
there you go.
Good.
Yeah,
right.
and before we get started here, I just want to point out here, Dave is the CEO of Ohos, which is a communication platform, and that he was kind enough to give myself and a colleague a demo of last week, and a great system, and I'm excited to learn more about this as we go and the philosophies behind it. So thank you, Dave.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to set everybody's mind at ease, like, I'm not here to sell Ohos or anything like that. It's more about the methodology, and whatever tool you decide, whether you try and do this manually or if you find another system that fits your needs that, incorporates some of these kind of philosophies and principles, more power to you. I just want to make sure that we're being more successful in the work that we're doing. So. Thank you guys for having it, for having me on. I can't see the chat, so if anything comes up on chat, if you guys will let me know, just while I have it kind of in presentation mode, it doesn't show me the chat, but excuse me. So first off, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time, and a lot of the stuff that Sam talked about is the reasoning behind, why we even created OHOS and started looking at different things, because we started looking at this and started going, okay, what's the goal of performance management? At the end of the day, we want to try and keep our best people, find our best people, make sure that they stay engaged, and then figure out how do we target and get the most out of our training and development. Last year, over $1.7 trillion was spent. That's just within the United States. That's 7.5% of our GDP spent on something that at the end of the day, people are going, well, it's still kind of not working. Like the executives are still saying that, finding and keeping key talent is huge. Succession planning and trying to find and identify those leaders is difficult and not necessarily resulting in some of the outcomes that they're hoping for. Workforce engagement alignment that Sam was talking about as well. And then how do you continue to grow and develop new skills to meet future needs? So those developmental aspects that Sam referred to of the performance management system is to help us with those particular things. One of the things that we started looking at, and this kind of goes to some of the stuff that Sam talked about in terms of some of the problems and common complaints, but there's also a lot of, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of science that's based around human performance when things go well. And when you start looking at the traditional or current performance management processes, there's a lot of things that just don't line up, right? Getting more timely feedback is really, really important, but most review processes are very standardized and very generalized and periodic. And again, regular recognition, increasing engagement, Sam talked a little bit about that. And to that particular point is most performance management systems are focused on what's going wrong rather than what they're doing well. So you lose that recognition piece. Or put another way, and I was listening to a podcast actually, and it was by the founder and CEO of Whole Foods. And one of the things he says is, he realized as a CEO that whenever he gives feedback, he realizes the power that his critical feedback can come across as, being the CEO. So he says he's really, really mindful of when and how he gives, critical feedback. Most of the time, he said, I can give 10 great pieces of positive feedback, and then I add one negative piece of feedback and people walk away demoralized.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of performance management is structured that way, to where managers, one, I've seen this happen before, where the system is set up to where a manager will get all the way through and go, I think you're doing a great job, but I have to tell you something that you're not doing well. Like they have to find something critical. And it's like, no, you don't. Like you can wait until that opportunity presents itself, but you don't need to manufacture something negative just because it checks the box.
Right. Yeah. And I think that a big part, Dave, when we just think about when we're doing any particular task, when we're walking in to do something that we haven't done before, or maybe we're not an expert at, we have this dread that, geez, how do I do this? And how do I work through this? And what are the expectations of my boss or my client or whatever it may be on this? And so when you're having this regular communication, I mean, you can work through those issues, understand expectations more clearly, understand, getting thoughts about, how to go about the process. And so it's just a natural issue.
Well, and something that's interesting, you said, making the expectations more clear. I joined a company earlier this year as VP of People Ops, and we're slowly migrating them away from a traditional once a year top-down, performance review that's very generalized. And so very much your point in terms of how long does the change process take to go from, a very traditional process. We're a company of about 50 people, and from a change readiness perspective, it's dripping little elements of what you're trying to create before you throw everything in. It's going to take us a little bit over a year because people have to be ready for that feedback and also not be afraid of it. Is another big piece. And this next piece, the if-then rewards actually hurt performance, whenever you're talking about complex tasks. They can be really effective in very mechanical and kind of rote tasks and accomplishments. But whenever you get into things like creativity and innovation and really difficult and complex problem solving, the more money you tend to pile on as a possible reward, the worse the outcomes become, which seems very opposite of what we would think. And
No,
not to discount anything that Sam said around using a review system to calculate compensation and bonuses. It absolutely should be a data point, and it should help inform those decisions. I
mhm.
think what a lot of companies are learning is the pay for performance, where it is a directly linked tool, starts to marginalize the importance of the feedback of actually helping people get better at their job. And then you end up with performance management by accounting. So accounting says, well, you can give people a 3 to 4% raise. So basically the performance management form is filled out in a way that they can give them the raise they want, which
Mhm.
means the feedback isn't really all that great. And whenever I think what really kind of blew up the whole pay for performance idea was when the US hit the recession and companies were scaling back and people were getting pay cuts. And now you have this performance management system that says you're doing really great and you get a 3% pay cut. It's like,
Yeah.
those don't seem to line up. Um,
Yeah, that's totally true. One thing I want to bring back that you mentioned before is the types of roles. Like for instance, those creative roles
right.
versus it's so super important that those creative roles are not leveraged with huge incentives and bonus and so forth. I mean, these are the pieces where we want people to feel collected and calm about and creative about how they approach a particular process and not pressured by an external element. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think, to that point, I think there's a difference between appreciation, recognition, and reward, right? Appreciation is how I feel about who I am and what I bring to the team. It might not be very specific to any one particular thing, but do I feel appreciated in a general sense? Recognition is like, did you do a great job at something? So it's usually kind of looking back at previous performance and going, okay, I want to give you something in recognition for the effort that you put in or for the outcomes that you got. So I think with creative and innovative roles, you can still add some recognition, but the reward piece, which is typically if you do this, then you get this, that tends to complicate things. And it ends up being a slippery slope in a lot of ways as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
this other one, and this is a big one, this really underpins why we took a completely different approach whenever we built OHOS, and that is leaders are bad at identifying high performers. They're bad at identifying potential leaders, and that there's a lot of research behind that. Some of it's because of their bias, but also they're in a really bad position. So, um, you know, if you look at it from a perspective or from a perspective issue, managers have never been led nor will ever be led by the people they're selecting. So it is really, really difficult for them to see somebody as a leader, like in terms of how they show up as a leader, because they've never been in that environment. They can see really good followers and really good doers, but not necessarily really good leaders. Leaders tend to emerge from the group. And one of the things that performance management assumes is that, and Sam, you alluded to this too, and that especially with the new kind of workplace becoming more and more decentralized, people working remotely, people working on project teams, sometimes the manager has absolutely no idea what you've been doing or how you've been showing up in those particular meetings because they're not there.
Mhm.
And traditional performance management assumes managers know what's going on and they can manage their own biases, which most of the time they can't, because sometimes maybe they're unaware of them. Sometimes they might think they're managing them well, but they're not. Um, so putting managers at that center post does a couple things. One, it gets you bad data. The other thing it does, and this is a big piece to it too, and this kind of speaks to, I think, one of the lines you had in the common complaint, is it sets up unhealthy competition in terms of the performance management process.
Right.
It's, and the analogy somebody gave me at one point whenever I was talking to them about our approach was, um, typical performance management or kind of how management works is all throughout the year, we're telling managers you need to be a coach. So if you think of it like an Olympic coach or Olympic gymnastics team or whatever, right? Um, all year long, that coach is supposed to help the person believe in themselves, help them achieve more things, and feel good about what they're doing. Now imagine if at the end of the year, that coach held a competition for all of their people, and then they were also the judge, jury, and executioner of whatever happened at the end of that. And then you can't expect that that relationship with that manager is going to be the same for the people who didn't make the podium.
Mhm.
And essentially what we do with traditional performance management by putting them at the helm of providing all the feedback is we have created a system where we are saying, we want you to coach, we want you to be the coach, but then you have to judge everybody's performance at the same time, which is very different than a coaching role. Coaching is, you see opportunities to help people get better, but you're never really evaluating how good they're doing. It's more about what are the opportunities for development. And as soon as you add that critical element there, you change the dynamic.
Right. Yeah. So I think that when in that traditional element, we're putting all the judgment power in this one person, right? Instead of
Mhm.
and really thinking about our customers and our coworkers and those people that are enjoying our services. And so it's much more important for us to spread that so-called judgment out, our feedback, I guess you could say, to ensure that we're getting it from multiple sources. Because if you're looking at the traditional model, I mean, just thinking about from this a very rudimentary way, if you have you and another colleague, and your other colleague is getting all the praise, and after a while you're like, oh, geez, I wish I could get that praise too, and you start resenting your colleague because he's
Right.
doing so well or she's doing so well. And really you should be part of that praise as well, and
Yeah.
sharing in that and learning from that and working together on improving the entire team. So
Well, and I think that kind of segues into the next point, which, around self-evaluation, self-promotion, those kinds of things. So a lot of performance management processes are starting to incorporate self-evaluations, like ask the employee what they think, and then ask the manager what they think. It's usually a conversation starter. And typically if you're looking at assessments and you're looking at assessment data, self-evaluations are almost universally inaccurate. High performers tend to rank themselves lower, and low performers tend to rank themselves higher in most competencies. And there's a recent study showing simply because men are more likely to self-promote than women, including self-evaluations can overly benefit men in your workplace and put women at a disadvantage. And this actually happened with my wife, where she submitted her self-evaluation at one point, and one of the things she said is, in her self-evaluation, is she didn't feel that she was necessarily a strategic thinker, and she wanted to get more involved in strategy. Well, whenever she had the one-on-one with her manager, the only negative thing that came back was about strategic planning, and it was because of what she had put on the review. It wasn't something that was on there before. So she basically kind of torpedoed herself in some ways, by putting that self-evaluation in there. Excuse me. We already talked a little bit about, workplaces becoming more decentralized, and there's also a lot of data that supports the whole idea around, the less you supervise employees, the better the performance actually gets. And most performance management systems begin with the assumption that individual performance is something that needs to be managed. So it's a very theory X, if you will, kind of mentality that people are, and for those of you who can't remember theory X, or maybe weren't, exposed to theory X or theory Y, theory X basically says that generally people are lazy, stupid, and don't want to do a whole lot of work. So if you don't, give them incentives and, use the carrot and the stick and make sure you're constantly managing them, people won't work. Whereas theory Y says, no, people generally want to do a great job and they want to contribute. They're not lazy, they're not stupid. They just need a little bit more either guidance or coaching or feedback in order to figure out where are they not necessarily hitting the bar. So there are a lot of challenges with the current performance management process. And one of the things that we really started with was by challenging the whole idea of the expert model. So a performance management system is built on the expert model, meaning that managers are the experts and they know what they're doing. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands or, anybody to volunteer. You can definitely do it in the chat if you like, but how many of you would say 95% of your managers are excellent at identifying talent, having great conversations, coaching their people, advocating for their people. They love leading other people, and they know what's going on at all times and can absolutely 100% control their biases. The majority of the time, it's if it's 50%, you're probably doing pretty well, quite honestly. And one of the things that, an analogy I kind of used as well is, if you're not confident in the strength of your leadership at all the levels within your organization, why would you ask them for a recommendation of who to promote? That's like asking a really bad mechanic which mechanic you should go to. If somebody constantly is breaking your car when you take it to the oil shop or the mechanic shop, why would you ask them for a referral? You wouldn't. You'd start asking the people who've been to other mechanics. So that whole idea around consumer or customer experience and direct experience is starting to take over, and it has in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, Consumer Reports is still out there, but most of the time it's like an extra page that maybe you check, but for the most part, you're looking on Amazon, you're looking on Google, you're looking at different reviews that people who have experience with the product in the environment, can provide some feedback on. Same thing with travel, same thing with even information. I mean, expert model from Encyclopedia Britannica, is gone. It's not even a thing. And that organization was around for hundreds of years. And it was replaced solely by a crowdsourced model. So the whole principle of the expert model in other industries is going away and starting to give rise to peer validated and kind of objective feedback from people who have direct experience.
Right. And
Add
just one thing I want to bring on that really quick. I mean, just think about how the expert model is being used today. I mean, there's a lot of times the expert model is almost a pay to play type of situation where, there a lot of companies are saying, well, I want to look good in this particular referral or referrer. And so they actually pay for that spot. Now, in an employee concept, the managers are often biased by saying, well, so-and-so has, I know that the executive team really likes so-and-so. So if I promote that person, then I'm not going to be judged by making a bad mistake or, and so there, a lot of those types of biases come into play when they shouldn't. Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think that's a really good point. And I also, I meant to mention this, but excuse me, a lot of times, for the last, I'd say couple decades, you've heard the term managing up in terms of, helping yourself and all that stuff. Managing up is a followership skill. It's not a leadership skill because managing up is all about how well are you self-promoting, how well are you getting along with the manager, more or less, and doing what they want you to do, not necessarily advocating for your team or making sure you're standing up for the people that are around you and your team. And that's what leadership is. That's what people are looking for when they think about a leader, is somebody they can trust to advocate for them when they're not in the room. And if somebody is managing up and that's the person that ends up getting promoted, they're probably doing it for their own particular reasons. So that's what kind of leads to this next piece.
One thing there, David. Yeah. I think Char's dog had a question. Char,
Yes, my dog did have a question. No, I would say I've seen this managing up scenario where we had directors and leaders that were very well favored by the executive team that did the quality of managing up well, where the C-suite would see them as a great leader, where myself as an HR business partner was fully well aware of their actual metrics and actual employee engagement, the culture of the organization, and the fact that their teams did not necessarily trust them. I've actually seen those scenarios. For example, a nursing director that was promoted to a chief nursing officer in another hospital, and it actually turned disastrous when she went to a smaller hospital as a chief nursing officer, and all of those behaviors were uncovered as far as a leader. So I think it's very important when you talk about managing up.
Yeah. And not to say it's not a good skill, it's just not a leadership skill, right?
Right.
It's not something that demonstrates leadership. One of the things that I meant to mention here, and this kind of goes to this slide as well, is so there's a lot of assessments out there that try to measure leadership agility, leadership potential, leadership possibilities, those kinds of things. And the correlation on most of them is fairly loose. There are a few that are closer than others, a few that are better than others. But when you're looking at general competencies and skill sets, those assessments have a loose correlation to actual leadership success. Now, they might get promoted as a result of those assessments. So from a career perspective, maybe it seems like they're successful, but from a leadership success, in terms of how that person is showing up day in and day out with their team, there's a really loose correlation. The number one thing that correlates almost one-to-one to manager or leadership success when moving into a new role or into a leadership role is, do they or do they not have the support of the people they're about to lead? If they don't, chances of that person being successful in that role go way down, regardless of their skills and ability. If the team doesn't trust them or believe in them or support them in the role, they are going to struggle. And vice versa, somebody who might be a little bit lower on the skills and competency side, but the team trusts and supports them in the role, their chances of success go way up. And that's one thing that in most performance management systems doesn't exist anywhere. In terms of, do you trust this person to lead, whether it's leading a team, leading people, leading a project, whatever it happens to be, do you trust this person to lead? Not, are they smart? Are they good at the competencies? Are they skilled? Are they, achieving a lot? It's, do you trust this person?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and the knowledge worker type of environment, and especially when you're wanting to take get the best out of your team, and in past environments where it's more of a command and control, I'm sure that's there's less of an impact there, but in today's environments, this totally resonates. Yeah, you need to make sure that the team is supportive of the leader that's being put there.
And I'll say just a little bit to this slide. This was kind of the catalyst for everything that we've done with OHOS, of realizing that 72% of managers don't like leading people. Like, that's not why they went into management. So it's not a surprise that they struggle when it comes to those leadership functions: giving good feedback, coaching people, helping select the right people, advocating for their people, motivating, engaging, and retaining their talent. When only 72%, or I'm sorry, when only 27 or 28%, excuse me, actually like leading people, it's not a coincidence that the global engagement levels are right around 28 to 30%. So this is the inverse corollary, where we have promoted a lot of people out of individual contributor roles where they're really successful into leadership positions that they never really wanted in terms of actually leading people. And then we wonder why our engagement doesn't change. It's, well, we keep promoting the wrong people. So
wow. I just want to say something about that, Dave, that I'm stunned by that statistic, but it makes so much sense to me. And it just, the thing that popped up for me right away about that is why?
right.
Is that because it's the only pathway to making more money and having more status? What's the deal there?
Yeah, I think honestly it's because of the system we've created, and how we've been using it. So when we use performance management, where it's looking at individual skills and abilities to then promote people, it's like, well, the system that we created, we're using it for a different purpose, right? So the system is saying, here's somebody who's really good at the job, and we make the mental leap and the logical leap of going, oh, well, then they should lead people. It's like, no, that's a completely set of different competencies that we haven't been measuring at all. So I think it's more the system, and because that's the system we have in place. And if you go back to, I can't remember if it was Drucker, I think it was Drucker, kind of postulated the whole idea of, if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it. So we started measuring everything when it came to performance management, and we were using that measurement as the data that then informed whether or not somebody was either promoted or got a raise, got merit, got bonuses, those kinds of things, but they're all based on individual contributorship. So I think the system was built for individual contributors and recognition, but then we started using it for succession planning when that wasn't the purpose of it at all.
Yeah. That is interesting. And I wonder if your company, and I assume your company, you're experimenting with, I know the most famous example I know of is Facebook, that is got multiple paths. So you can actually be an individual contributor and still have a pathway to higher pay is really kind of what it boils down to,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we have that as well. And even using, the ranges that Sam was showing with the TMA method and things like that around compensation, is you can get somebody into that top area of the compensation, and then it just becomes a really honest conversation of, look, for the role that you're currently in, you are at the top of your pay range, like not just within this organization, but within the market. So it's like, if you are looking for more pay, then there's some development we need to do in these other areas. If you don't want to manage people, please tell me that. And we will figure out how to make sure you've got opportunities in order to, feel like you're properly recognized and incentivized and appreciated and those kinds of things. But within our company, that's a question we ask everybody before we even go down this road of trying to do succession planning is, do you like the idea of leading people?
Yeah.
And if you don't, we have all sorts of other things we can do, but we're no longer trying to do this up or out mentality that I think a lot of companies had for a while.
Yep.
That I think has hurt kind of the leadership credibility across succession planning processes and things like that.
Yeah, and one thing to mention about this as we're talking about the pay element, and and having that dual, we call it a dual career path, where you have the manager career path, you have an individual career path, and for that to really work well without having an individual contributor say something, well, I don't want to manage, but I don't want to stop my career either. I still want to develop my expertise. I want to earn more and grow. So we basically shattered the element that you have to be in the manager track to earn more. You can be in that individual contributor track and still grow up and actually earn more than a manager if you're contributing that value to the organization. So that's part of that path that we need to be more in tune with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've taken that same approach with we have equity incentives and stock grants and things like that, and we have kind of a hierarchical managerial track that has a certain percentage, and then we have individual contributor track where the percentages are pretty much the same, to where you can be a key contributor at a high individual level and be making getting as much equity as a senior director or a VP, because you're crucial to the organization. So there's a lot of things you can do with compensation and incentives and long-term incentives and even recognition to make sure that people feel appreciated. And I think one of the things that helps too is, and I think this speaks a little bit to some of the stuff you're talking about, is if we make the performance management system and the feedback system less opaque, and much more transparent and provide much more visibility, as well as our compensation philosophies and provide some visibility to that. My whole contention is, for companies that don't talk about their compensation practices or are afraid of visibility, and I don't necessarily mean transparency where you find out what each individual earns. That can definitely be troublesome sometimes. But visibility to say, here's how much this particular role pays within our organization, and here's how much that pays in the market. If you can give that level of visibility to people, one, people have the internet. They can go on and find out how much the average software engineer makes. And if they're not making that much, they're going to say, well, why not? But if you start the conversation and say, here's the data we're looking at, here's the compensation we're looking at, here's the market, here's where we have you, here's where the market pays, and here's what we're paying you. And we've actually, over the last year, we've adopted something that I'm calling kind of Market Plus, which is, what would this person's talent be worth in the market, which factors in what's their experience, skill, ability level. It's like, okay, if this person maybe is worth 75,000 in the market, I go, okay, great, that's their market pay. Plus, what are they worth to us? What is that internal knowledge? What is that knowledge capital? What have they developed? What have they added? Where do we see them? And how do we add something on top of that and say, okay, if they left, they could absolutely get this tomorrow. We want to make sure they don't feel the need to do that. So we're going to pay them at least what they're worth in the market, plus what they're worth to us. And we need to communicate that openly and honestly and say, here's how you're being paid, here's why you're being paid what you're being paid, and here's the path to making more if that's what you choose. So when it comes to performance management and stuff like that, these are kind of the biggest things that we kind of went with, which is, okay, we need to at least stop using what we know doesn't work, even if we don't know what's going to work better. I worked with one company at one point, and they were struggling. I can't even remember the problem at one point. I was working as a consultant, but they were working on a problem, and I said, well, okay, well, let's do this. And they're like, well, what about, if we do that, then maybe we have these problems. I'm like, yeah, maybe. And they're like, well, why would we adopt a solution that we know is going to have other problems? And I'm like, because those problems might be easier to fix. Like, you've been staring at this problem for 5 years. I'm saying I can fix this problem. And yes, the solution we put in could have other issues, but then let's solve those issues as we go. Like, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think a lot of companies are looking for what's the right way to do performance management. And I don't know that there is a right way. I mean, I'm really proud of what we've created, and I would say it's not the right way for every company. But hopefully it's better than what we know doesn't work already. And what we started doing is we started looking at, let's look at other industries. How are they getting better results? How are they getting better feedback? How are they getting better performance? Statistics and data and those kinds of things. Data science, data research is yielding huge benefits. So how do we use some of the information from statistics and data research? And then how do we look at research methodology? When you look at, so the whole, not not to get political or anything like that, but the whole idea around immunizations and the connection to uh, not Asperger's, but shoot, what's the autism? Sorry, the link between immunisms and autisms, or immunizations and autism. That link was a single source, one particular person who was regarded as an expert in their field, who had manufactured their research, and it has cost millions of lives across the world simply because of that expert model. And when you start looking at, well, what should research methodology be doing? Well, there's peer review. Like, when you look at scientific research, like, if you're just a scientist and you publish an article, people are like, yeah, that's great. If you get something published in a peer-reviewed journal, and there's all sorts of people looking at it and criticizing your take, your methodology, all that kind of stuff, the results become much more validated. So we started exploring other effective models in terms of 360s and competency assessments. And I think the biggest thing we did is we started with a different assumption. Like, we assumed that managers don't know what's going on all the time, and it's not their fault. They were never trained how to evaluate people. They were never trained how to set expectations clearly. They were never trained how to look out for leadership. They were never trained how to coach, by and large. Now, in some organizations they do, but for the most part, most managers, are kind of moved from an individual position and said, okay, good luck. Let me know if you need anything. And then we say, oh, well, here, oh, you don't know how to do performance management. Well, here's a form to fill out. It's like, well, that's okay. I can figure out how to fill the form, but giving feedback and coaching is something that's very different. So the approach we took was, first off, it needed to be decentralized. We needed to get feedback to and from all people within the organization. So if I have an interaction with Sam, I need to have the opportunity to be able to give him feedback. That doesn't mean, so say I only interact with Sam maybe once a quarter. Well, I'm probably not going to give him as much feedback as somebody who's with him all the time. So the weighting of the feedback becomes more about closeness to the experience as opposed to anybody's particular position. The other thing, and this is, to kind of demystify this to some degree, is what I'm advocating for isn't necessarily a democratic process where people get to vote on who they want to promote, but how do we put data into the hands of the people that are making those decisions so that they can make better decisions? So it's more decentralized data collection, because the traditional succession process is a manager will look back at the reviews that they filled out as data to support their decision to promote somebody. And it's like, well, just because you wrote it down doesn't make it data. It's still your opinion. You just wrote it down. And if there's 20 other people this person works with, and there's 20 people that they're going to be leading, doesn't their opinion and belief system matter around how this person shows up?
Absolutely.
We also needed the feedback to be quick. You mentioned, performance reviews take way too long. The way our system is designed, you can give feedback, in under 30 seconds. But because it aggregates and it's, based off the feedback from everybody else, you end up with this huge data set.
Yeah,
And
one,
I'm not gonna read through all these, but go ahead.
no, but one point on that. I mean, I've interacted with a couple of new prospects and for clients that, and they've told me their stories about the performance management process and how they've gone away from the annual performance review to something that was like quarterly or real time feedback.
Right.
And then they were saying, but it's too much. We can't handle the administration. We can't do it. We can't do this. And so they've implemented something that they thought was better, but then the administration just killed them. And now they wanted to go back to the annual review. So
Yeah.
the process you adapt is super important here.
Yeah, Google actually did that. They had monthly. My cousin was a VP with Google, and when we were developing Ojos, I had a conversation with him. We're like, tell me about your process. He's like, oh man, he's like, it's terrible. I'm like, what? And he's like, well, it's great feedback. He's like, I have to do this every month with my people. He's like, and each time takes me an hour and a half. He's like, I have 10 people. He's like, that's basically a week's worth of time every month that I'm just dedicating to performance evaluation. He goes, and we're talking about spreading it out to every 2 months. He's like, well, that's fine, but we're still using the same process. So if you're taking the same process and approach and doing kind of the traditional performance management approach, but especially from a top-down perspective to where the manager has to create all the data, well, now you might be shrinking the time interval between the periods where people are getting feedback, but you're multiplying the administrative cost in terms of time. So there's got to be a better way with that. I'm not going to read through all these. You guys can read through these, but we wanted to make sure that real-time visibility, so we never hide anything. The individuals see all the feedback that they get. Now, it is anonymous in the sense that I don't know specifically who it came from. I might know what perspective it came from, meaning did this come from a client? Did it come from an employee? Did it come from a manager? Did it come from a peer, right? So I know kind of the groups that it might be coming from, but I don't know specifically unless that person chooses to identify themselves. But anybody can see it, can see their own feedback at any time. So it's easier for them to kind of make those faster corrections. They can see how they're performing historically to see if they're doing better. Much of the same stuff that you guys are doing with TMA and that particular approach there too, to where people can see their historical progress. Am I getting better? And then there is one of the things that makes us really unique is there's the fear around anonymous feedback that people are going to use it as a platform to just flame people and be mean or torpedo people's careers. One of the things that Ojos has built into it is a system of accountability that can help people see and help managers see if there is a deviation from the norm, meaning say Sam and I work together and I don't like Sam. So all the feedback I give Sam is bad feedback. Well, everybody else thinks Sam is doing great. I will find out based on the feedback that I'm providing, and my manager would find out that I'm rating Sam lower than everybody else is rating Sam. So what is that about? And not just like a little bit. We use statistical modeling and all that stuff and standard deviation to make sure it's significant enough. But if I'm rating him significantly lower than everybody else, I show up as an outlier for Sam. Which then holds me a little bit more accountable to the feedback that I'm going to give, because now the manager can say, hey, what's going on with you and Sam? Like, do you see something that other people don't see? So is this actually a performance issue and nobody else seems to be seeing it? Or are you looking at Sam differently than you're looking at everybody else? And what's that about? So you can start to suss out other individual interpersonal issues, and it helps keep the data clean. So rather than having to use an artificial process where we manipulate the data and pull out the outliers, because a lot of people ask us, do we pull out statistical outliers? And we're like, no, because by the nature of aggregated data, you don't need to do that. That one negative feedback out of 100 isn't going to have that much power, but you need to have some way to hold people accountable for the feedback that they're providing.
Right. I really like that the fact that a manager is informed, and it's not always a bad situation. I mean, there could be a lot of information that comes out of that, like that person has a unique experience that it could be negative or positive. And if it's in a sense, if it's a positive thing, it could be a way to where that the whole team could benefit if they knew the details, or that they on a particular element. Yeah,
and somebody could absolutely be a positive outlier, right? So I mean, maybe Lisa and I work together and she's my best friend, so I'm giving her all sorts of great feedback. Well, that's not necessarily good for the data model either, and it's not necessarily good for Lisa's development either. So I need to be able to give honest feedback when it comes to that as well. So it can go both ways. And the last thing, and this is just, again, kind of, a little bit of a trend that I think we need to be ready for as HR professionals is it's already happened in California. It's going to continue to happen within the US, especially as more privacy concerns, open things up and we start realizing how much data is actually out there about us. But the whole idea of GDPR and global data privacy regulations and stuff like that, it's coming. It's going to be here in the US within a few years, which means people need to be able to own their performance data. So it's no longer, yes, a company might facilitate the collection of it, but at the end of the year, the individual, if they leave the organization, they can say, I want to delete my data or I want to take it with me. And there are, as far as I know, we are one of the only systems to where we can actually have your data portable to where when you leave an organization, you can take it with you and then you can import it into a new company if you choose to do that. So that way you get a career-long view of your performance, not just a snapshot of how you performed at that particular company. So you can even say, well, yeah, I did really well in these, this company, I was there for 5 years. I moved to this other company. It just was not a fit. It's like, well, yeah, we could see that, It's like there's a dip in performance and things like that. It's like, that just wasn't a good place for me. So anyway, there's a lot of different things around kind of performance management, but the biggest thing I think is be aware of the assumptions we're making with the systems we're bringing into play, and are they accurate assumptions, or is the data telling us something completely different? And I think with traditional top-down performance management, the data is saying managers aren't necessarily the best source of information when it comes to all things related to somebody's individual performance. So these are kind of, just last little perspectives, so start changing the way we look at leadership, start changing the way we look at, performance management, career progression, those kinds of things. And it's kind of funny. I saw there was I think it was a West Wing episode where somebody had come in and showed the world in this particular orientation where it's essentially upside down from our normal view. And one of the people in the room was saying, turn that around, like that's making me uncomfortable. That's not how the world looks. And the only reason it looks the other way is because we chose to put the North Pole at the top and make it the North Pole, right? There's nothing that says that that's the way it floats in space. That's just how we've decided to orient it. And whenever we start looking at how do we actually change things and make things better, we can't look at the same process and go, okay, how do we take the process we're currently using and adapt it and help managers do things more frequently? Because you run into the administrative problems and you're still perpetuating potentially the bias and problems that come with the old system. And this, one of the things that we didn't realize would happen, but has been a really nice artifact from the different approach and being a decentralized approach, is diversification of the types of leaders you promote in terms of gender, racial demographics, those kinds of things, because now no longer is the manager picking somebody that looks like them, or whether that's intentional or unintentional, you're getting data from all the different sources. So you end up with a much more diverse leadership pool and recognition pool in terms of who actually are your experts within the organization, rather than just the people that you want to go and get a beer with. That particular model. So this is part of changing that particular system so that we don't continue the racial and gender inequity that we have in a lot of organizations. Because as much as we would like to, you can't hit those things from the front, from face on, because it's illegal to hire somebody for, race or gender or anything like that, or to not promote somebody because of race or gender. But we want to try and solve it so quickly that a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to do that without getting in legal trouble. And it's like, yeah, that might get you kind of that short-term change, but long-term change, you've got to look at the systems and figure out what systems that have created this problem and how do we think of a different system or change the system so that the problems, and again, we may get other problems from this, but the problems that we've been battling for centuries start to go away.
Yeah. So one thing, I mean, as we have Albert here looking at us, there's a famous story about him that relates to the evolution of processes and why we can't stick with the same model that's been in place for 50 or more years, right? That in the performance management and paper for performance and so forth. The story goes is that Einstein was pulled up to the board of the school he was teaching at the university, and he was going to be reprimanded because he was using the same questions on every exam that he was giving his students. And he says, and the board's like, how could you do this? I mean, people that they can just, cheat off of your, next year's class can just cheat off of previous year's exam and so forth. And he goes, no, that's not a problem. It's not a problem. And he goes, well, explain to us why that's not a problem. He goes, well, the answers change every year. It's like, as we're faced with the same issue, but the way we go about that issue and changing and how we answer or approach that issue changes with society. It changes with what we know, what the new reality is. And so that's what he was explaining.
Yeah, and it's funny you kind of bring that up. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and we were talking about how you're doing, all that kind of stuff, the normal chit chat, and it's like, oh, I'm COVID fine. Is kind of the phrase that I've adopted. And somebody's like, yeah, I'm just waiting to figure out what the new normal is going to be. I'm like, this is it. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, where normal is just what we're used to and what's widespread. I was like, the reason people are so shell shocked is because the rate of change and the scope of the change that we've had to endure over the last 9 months with COVID, it's faster and bigger than anything else that has ever really happened to us in our lifetime. But this is normal. Like, normal is just, what's tomorrow going to be? Well, tomorrow's probably going to be pretty similar to today. So that's going to make tomorrow normal. But change is something that happens over time. But there's a lot of things that we continue to hang on to, performance management system being one of them, that's 30, 40 years old, that was developed before the internet. It was developed before cell phones. It was developed before cordless phones, for goodness sake.
Right.
So the world has changed so dramatically, and we're holding on to a 30-year-old paradigm and wondering why it doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm. Right. And earlier you were talking about just going to different places to get ideas and so forth. And I love that approach. I've constantly haunted by one time where I was had a recommendation for my boss and saying that, well, this particular industry does that. If we did that here, that would change all this. And he goes, well, we only do what this industry does. We don't do what they do. And so I was like, we're never going to advance in our thinking. And so there's a lot of different places we can go to find inspiration and so forth. And matter of fact, a lot of what we consider old ideas, things that happened in the 50s or in the 30s, there's some brilliant thinking back then.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's like, in a lot of it couldn't be adopted at that particular time because we didn't have the systems, the way to wrangle data as we do today. And so a lot of answers can be found in old just as much as it's finding in different industries.
Well, and I think what's interesting to that point, I think, a lot of the stuff we've learned about organizational psychology, human psychology, behavioral psychology, came out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But whenever we developed the performance management systems, we developed it off of, knowledge that was gained during the 30s and 40s. So even though the performance management system that we currently have is maybe 30, 40 years old, it's based on nearly 100-year-old thinking. And it's troublesome that it takes us 20, 30 years to adopt new information, but I think that's going to continue to get faster, not slower.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, so happy to chat, and really appreciated being a part of this. So happy for the Q&A as we come. And I don't, like I said, I haven't had a chance to look at any of the chat and that kind of stuff. So.
Right. Well, I have to say, in the chat, everyone's very excited about the fact that you're so insightful and have a deeper understanding of this topic. And as also a person of traditional HR and organizational effectiveness development background, I don't think you really understand what this paradigm shift truly means until you truly are a business owner So for example, in my world and some of my prior presentations, I had traditional performance management, talent management processes. I had a dashboard with metrics for my little company. And when the pandemic hit and we had to be shut down and we had to transform our total way of thinking, I love what you said, because I'm doing what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm doing about identifying that we have a superstar performer that is, somebody called her a rainmaker, that can do tons of widget production, but is not necessarily the right fit for being a leader at this time. I've been going through the process of working with Sam and his team on how we're going to compensate with this individual as actually making just as much, perhaps, as the executives of the company.
Yeah.
And how is that fair and right?
Yeah.
Also, one of the points I loved is you talk about that portability of your data. Boy, I needed that when I was looking for another job. It's really hard to write a resume.
Right. Well, and think about it in terms of, what this could possibly do, or a model like this could possibly do to things like LinkedIn and resumes and looking for references. It's like, I can give you, the past 10 years of my career for the 3 different places that I worked, feedback from everybody I worked at, and it's going to tell you what I'm really great at. And it's going to tell you the areas where I could maybe get better. It's like, I can't artificially manufacture it. Like I can write whatever I want on my LinkedIn profile. I can write whatever I want on my resume. I can cherry pick whichever references you want to listen to. And this really kind of takes a data centric approach. Kind of says, you can't mess with the data. The data is what the data is. And I think, adopting, again, whether it's OHOS or something like this or whatever, the more data you have, I've often said companies that are afraid of visibility or afraid of transparency or compensation and things like that, or defending their compensation choices for their superstars, is because they don't have the data to support it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not supportable, but they don't have the data to show somebody else. Then it sounds like it's the manager's opinion, right? So then it becomes what people start to think is a favoritism culture. And you need to have the data behind it. And I think that's where a lot of companies have moved away from traditional performance management, and Adobe is probably one of the bigger ones. Deloitte, I know, shifted away from it a while back. And I think where they started to struggle is, yes, the feedback that was happening more frequently was great. And I was always saying, like, well, that should have been happening anyway. But now that you're having more frequent conversations, great. How are you defending and substantiating the employment decisions you're making? And they're like, oh, well, we're having more conversations. And I'm like, okay, good. But how do you defend it? And they're like, well, because we're having more conversations. And I think what a lot of companies have actually moved back to, and the reason they've kind of gone back to performance management systems, is because they started to realize, okay, we don't have the data, and we're trusting the opinions of our managers, which, again, not a bad thing necessarily, unless it's not getting you the results you want, in which case you need to bring in more perspectives.
Right.
Well, I definitely know that our HR colleagues are in that state of building their competencies around metrics and data. It's been a difficult journey to try to get our hands around it. It sounds like you have some real top-notch solutions, and I think that's super fantastic. Also, I was just curious, do you serve individuals or only companies to become more data-centric and portability with their data?
Yeah, so as far as, can you get an individual subscription or use the platform on an individual basis? We don't have an individual subscription yet. That's not to say that we won't. Right now, it's kind of static. And the reason for that is we want to try and contain it some way in terms of where's the data coming from, right? So if I give you a personal subscription on your professional competencies, what's to say you're not going to send that out to all your best friends and say, hey, give me great ratings? So we're using the organizational model as kind of a container to help validate the information based on the sources that we'd be getting it from. So it helps us get a more contained version. Now, from a portability standpoint, when you take it with you, the data stays static in that you can't accumulate more data, but you can export it, you can still view it, you can share it, you can do whatever you want with it in terms of showing other people the data. And then again, like you said, you can import it into another organization if they happen to, use OHOS as well.
Well, we definitely believe in championing career mobility. And so career mobility, I think, makes you as an employer a very attractive employer to those that want to move where they go in their career. And if you care about your employee's career, even beyond your organization, employees will appreciate that and want to work for you.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and we take a similar approach kind of to what Sam was talking about in terms of competency, using competencies as the basis of this. Because you have the aggregated data, what you're able to do within OHOS is, say you have a project coming up, and you need some people who are hugely customer focused, excellent problem solvers, great communicators, and some really good presenters. If those are competencies that you're measuring within your organization, you can create basically a list. You can say, okay, we're looking for these 4 competencies. Who are our top people in those 4? And then you go, okay, here's our 7 people that we're going to pick. Out of those 7, which one has the highest leadership recommendation from their team? Great. Now we have the team that has all the skills and competencies we need. We're the best at this that we could possibly get. And we know who's going to lead the team. And it's all based on the feedback that people are getting. So it starts to create this opportunity for career mobility where you might say, hey, we've got another role over here. And it starts to break down some of the barriers of functional fixedness that you can run into by being able to pull out the different competencies that somebody might be great at that could also fit really well in a certain other role.
That's great.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, Dave, thank you so much. It's been just such an honor to have you part of our People Strategy Forum today. I understand, Sam, next week is about recognition.
That's right. So we're going to definitely talk a lot about recognition next week, and very excited to have that conversation.
Awesome.
Go through details.
Yeah. So, but thank you, Dave. This was great. So if anybody wants to have some time with Dave, you've been.
Yeah, you can bring up that poll that I launched earlier, and so that's in the. If you can see that is I think you just click on the polls at the bottom, and it'll bring that back up, and you can go ahead and.
So we're going to wrap up now. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Enjoy being a part of it.
All right. Bye.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye.